How many of you can name a pivotal moment that started you on a trajectory you otherwise would never have taken? I can, and it was the moment I finally said yes to the highly persuasive, really super pesky, also legendary speech coach at Harrison County High School, Bruce Florence. But I came so close to not doing it. Every year of high school, she bugged me to take speech, but I had zero interest. I was a full-on band geek. Harrison County had a great band. We were pretty cliquish. I didn't need any other activities or any other friends. But during my junior year, for reasons I can't remember anymore, I helped out with 2 school plays and I liked it. More importantly, I made good friends who happened to be on the speech team. So when I was signing up for classes my senior year, I finally said yes to Bruce Florence. If I hadn't, I would have missed my entire life as I know it. I would never have joined the Harrison County speech team. I would never have met Margaret Reynolds, the coach of Georgetown College's speech team, which I joined. I would never have met Ed Smith, who became my husband. I probably would never have gotten to live in cool towns like Chapel Hill, North Carolina, Austin, Texas, or Moorhead, Kentucky. I would never, ever, ever have had the skill set or the courage to audition for and become a Kentucky Chautauqua presenter. And if I had never become a Chautauquan, I'm pretty sure I otherwise would never have had a chance to perform on stage at the Kennedy Center. If I hadn't said yes to Bruce Florence, I definitely would not be co-directing KESDA or speaking to you this morning. Interestingly, though, Ed and I competed against each other in what was the same first ever speech tournament for both of us. It was at Scott County High School in the fall of 1981, and we both wound up in the same humorous final round. Before I go on, I should explain that back then, Kentucky speech was not the same big happy family we are now, not even close, enough said. So we crossed paths, but we didn't actually meet until 5 years later in January 1987. And we shouldn't normally have even met then because he did not enroll at Georgetown College or join the speech team until the year after I graduated and left. Life is funny like that, though. I came back to Georgetown College that winter to turn a communication arts minor into a major, and I traveled as a judge with the speech team. Fun fact, you can learn a lot about somebody on a long van ride. Disclaimer, participation in speech does not guarantee anyone a marriage proposal, but it can still instill some pretty great skills that will benefit a student for life.
So, welcome to our keynote. We'd like to spend the next 3 hours talking about how coaching speech rocks, so strap in, folks.
And even though we could talk for 3 hours, we'll shoot for another 20 minutes or so and then take questions at the end.
So we have some caveats here, some disclaimers. And as Betsy said, we realize that this Halloween will mark our 40th anniversary of our involvement in forensics. And it doesn't seem that long, and then sometimes it seems longer. I guess that's what becoming old does to you. But one thing we'd like to point out is that our observations and opinions can differ wildly from other folks that are on this call, other directors, people who've been doing this a long time. Now, listen, we can't help if they're wrong. But in all seriousness, there are a lot of different ways to approach this activity that work, and we think that's great. We don't always agree on things, on how to do things, but everyone here that's runs a league is interested in students, and we're interested in what's best for students. And so we're delighted to get a chance to speak to you all today, but also we're also delighted that there are other really smart folks and capable folks on this call. We also have some reservations about things that go on with our discipline in terms of trends. And if you ask us, we'll share them. But this is a great activity. It's not perfect. But again, we think it offers some of the best chances to change the trajectory of students' lives for the better. And I think that speech coaches are more important now than when I started doing this in 1981 as a competitor. Speech coaches are, as a breed, certainly more congenial now than we were 40 years ago, as Betsy alluded to. I remember as a young coach, Betsy and I were hired as assistant coaches at Harrison County High School in the 87-88 year. It was intimidating sitting in the coaches' lounge. Everyone was just chain smoking and glaring at each other. And I mean, these folks could shoot daggers out of their eyes. It was all very polite, but sometimes very tense. And now we're just delighted that Kentucky coaches routinely help and encourage one another's students.
As a new key coach, you're going to be overwhelmed with help and affection if you just give us a chance. We're like big, hopeful dogs, really.
Yeah, she's not wrong about that. And so we'd like to talk about 4 things that you can look forward to as a new coach or as someone who's returning to the activity. And these 4 are, you're going to be helping students with the most important, useful activity for success in their lives. You're going to be learning an activity that is eminently adaptable and forces you to adapt too. You're going to be developing one-on-one relationships with students outside of class. And then finally, you're going to be helping students build grit. Unlike the youth soccer from the 90s, not everyone gets a trophy, but everyone wins because speech helps build grit. So, our first point. Speech is the best equipment for living because it helps students be brave. Even students who never final will routinely engage in an activity that terrifies most people. The National Institute of Mental Health reports that public speaking anxiety or glossophobia affects about 73% of the population. I read this on the internet, so it must be true. And in fact, it does mirror many studies throughout the years. Fear of public speaking is the most common phobia ahead of death, spiders, and heights.
And in a time when young people seem to be increasingly challenged even to speak on a phone, much less in front of an actual living audience, schools do a huge disservice by not offering speech and debate or drama classes. And fewer districts in Kentucky have speech teams. Employers are frustrated by millennials who insist on conducting business and making pitches by email instead of by phone or in person because they fear not being able to clearly communicate their thoughts. Employers need our speech kids.
Speech is some of the best equipment for living because it also helps students explore their inner worlds. The performance and interpretation events like poetry, prose, storytelling, HI, humorous interpretation, dramatic interpretation, duo interpretation, help students engage in self-expression and explore the inner lives of their characters, characters that may be like them or characters that may be very unlike them. And their ability to develop empathy, to empathize, to feel with the other is, as you might guess, more important now perhaps than it's ever been. And it also allows them to emote to their heart's content.
So much emoting, bless their little hearts.
Lots of talking to the walls in preparation. Competing in speech is also wonderful equipment for living because it allows students to explore the world around them. Speaking events offer you and your students a chance to engage in research, to write, and in your case, helping to rewrite, and then continuously refine knowledge about real world events, politics, and social issues.
Extemporaneous speaking demands 13-year-olds to learn more about current events than most of the adults in their lives and to write coherent speeches on a given question in the space of 30 minutes with authoritative sources and then perform it before an audience. You try that. Impromptu speaking can be even harder. Students compose a speech on the fly in about 3 minutes, defending or criticizing a given quotation. You want to give that a go? Or maybe you'd like to write and memorize a 10-minute speech for public speaking, oratory, or informative.
We also think competing in speech is great equipment for living because it allows students to explore the world around them. A competitive speech allows students to add their voices to debates and issues of the day. Student Congress, for instance, demands a whole dump truck full of skills, including serious research, being able to prepare a speech, delivering impromptu speeches, and networking with students from other teams. Bruce Florence, who Betsy mentioned earlier, who's probably forgotten more about coaching than we'll ever know, always maintains that Congress is the most complete event for preparing students to succeed in nearly every career. And then, before we get too highfalutin, and we can't be too highfalutin because we live in Indiana, competing in speech is great equipment for living because it's fun. Kids make friends on their team. They bond with teammates. They make friends statewide, sometimes even nationwide.
And it doesn't matter that they're fierce competitors, they are. Those friendships are real. Some of the students compete against one another from the time they're in 5th or 6th grade until they graduate high school and beyond. And
as we were preparing this, I thought there'd be a joke about frenemies somewhere in here, but really they're competitors who are often friends, and friend-petitors doesn't quite roll off the tongue.
It is fun watching these smart, talented kids operate. I remember one year at KESDA quarterfinals when the impromptu students were challenging each other to get up to work a random word like toast or carburetor or discombobulate into their speeches. And this was a round that was determining who was going to go on to semifinals. These students are just playing and having a great time. I've seen prom proposals at KESDA. And so often at the awards banquet, I've watched the seniors hug one another goodbye for the very last time. And I got to say, it brings a tear.
I like the camaraderie of this so much better than the vitriol of the era when Betsy and I competed. We did not have friends on other teams. We detested each and every one of those people.
I'm sure if he was on my radar, I would have tested Ed and his stupid drowned man HI, even if it was a Neil Simon piece.
Sometimes she still detests me.
Frequently.
Yeah.
I wasn't even an extemper, but I can still remember the name of a girl from Bullitt Central whom the entire Harrison County extemp team just loathed. And I'm sure she was without a doubt a perfectly nice human being.
But now students form close friendships with people on their own teams. They get to know students from other schools and other parts of the state. They compete. They eat cold pizza in lunchrooms. They ride buses before dawn on Saturdays, and they make memories that last forever. And it would be, we'd be remiss without also pointing out that competing in speech is a great equipment for living because it helps people succeed in college and beyond.
Giving students the necessary tools to become an articulate thinker can make all the difference in their futures. And speech and debate do just that. Dedicated participation in the activity instills innumerable skills, such as research, critical thinking, creativity, communication, collaboration, civic engagement, persuasion, organization,
lifting heavy objects with your mind, knot tying, advanced taxidermy,
writing, self-confidence, and the ability to think on your feet, just to name a few.
Or a lot.
There is no question that participation in speech and debate impacts a student long after graduation. The Wall Street Journal has credited competing in speech and debate with consistently helping students get accepted into those top-tier colleges. Their acceptance rates exceed those of students who participate in sports and almost any other extracurricular, as well as those who do community service activities. Beyond college, speech and debate just keep on giving. Forbes and Fortune magazines both advise companies to seek out applicants with speech and debate experiences.
Why?
Well, let me count the reasons. Soft skills learned through speech competition make students consummate communicators and agile thinkers and writers. Former competitors have experienced the sort of grace under pressure performance that speech demands, and they know how to carry themselves and dress like professionals. Speech students learn to connect with an audience and persuade them. They also learn to make connections with their peers, so important in developing future leadership.
So that's a whole lot of stuff about why we think speech is a wonderful activity to prepare students for life. It's great equipment for living, if you will. The second main thing you'll love about being a speech coach is that it is an eminently adaptable activity. As a new coach, you can expect to grow, to learn skills as you coach and master new events, be all that you can be, blah, blah, blah. In seriousness, though, welcome to lifelong learning. and it's fun. You can set big goals, try and have a big team. Now, I used to think that a big team meant 15 or 20 people. For some folks, big teams mean 50 students or more. But you can strive to coach state and national champions and eventually conquer the speech world. You could also try to recreate a 1/4 inch scale model of the Palace at Versailles using only toothpicks and pens. But alternately, you might just start with a handful of students, focusing on developing their skills, their self-esteem, their development as human beings, while also working on the whole speech and competition thing. You may want to limit yourself to learning only a handful of events initially, instead of trying to master all 14 or 15 at once. Nothing in the rules says you have to enter someone in every single event.
We have too many, we admit it, but we love them all. We can't let any of them go. It presents a world of challenges to anyone who wants to learn the activity. We really are sorry. Thanks for being game.
A final thought when planning your event slate, keep the students busy. Every single one of them ought to, if they're capable, do 2 or 3 events. It's good because it makes them well-rounded, and otherwise they just get bored and wander the building during the speech tournaments.
Because we will have them again someday.
Tournaments.
In person,
yes.
Soon.
All the people in one school, we're there. A final thought in terms of being adaptable. Strongly encourage, cajole, lean on your students just heavily enough to make them squirm, twist their arms a little bit to learn events they don't want to learn because they think they're too hard. Everyone wants to do prose and poetry because they get to hold a book with a script in it. Newsflash, because everyone does prose and poetry, it's the hardest events. They're some of the hardest events to break the finals. You have to go through more people. If they want a trophy, fall in love with extent of the memorized speaking events. And if they ever want to, say, write a paper in college, informative and oratory would be great places to practice that. It's an eminently adaptable activity because it also rewards observation. As new coaches or returning coaches, you need to know that you can be an effective coach if you are willing to observe how events work. What types of scripts or speech topics are you seeing in finals? What style of presentation and performance do you see in the final rounds? How are successful competitors constructing speeches? I know that when I started coaching as in college, I had done impromptu speaking, after dinner speaking, and that was it from the speaking events. Everything else was intro for me. And I had to coach extent and coach informative and persuasive speaking and rhetorical criticism. And I simply went out, watched final rounds, and then tried to observe and piece together what people were doing. The great thing is new coaches and even returning coaches, you can ask for help. And on second thought, you probably won't even have to ask. We're so happy to see new coaches join our merry little band that you'll have to swat help away with a lint roller.
And no, you should always carry a lint roller to tournaments, along with a few other handy dandy items. Ask Steve Meadows for a complete list of the contents of the emergency kit he calls Mom in a Box, because you never know what you might need. Our middle son could have used a new pair of pants halfway through his first speech tournament. It's not what you think.
Third, one of the things we think you're going to really enjoy is you're going to get a chance to build one-on-one relationships with students outside of class. When I started coaching in college, I realized that I really, really liked, this sounds weird, the coaching part. The tournaments really are for the students, and I like those fine, they're fun. But I really liked the work. I liked working in those practice sessions. And you get to do sustained work over time with students. You and your students will get the luxury of experiencing sustained, careful work. And that, hopefully you'll help them explore great literature that resonates with them. You're going to be introducing them to the great speeches of history, both ancient history and recent history. You're going to help them work through the nuances of constructing well-researched and then well-delivered speeches on topics they find meaningful. And you don't have to rush it. it's just you working with that student or two students if you're working on a duo. And I sometimes wish that I could teach my acting classes under the same model as I would a coach or as a director, where you get to meet students where they are, and then both of you work toward a common goal. I think that those one-on-one relationships that I've had starting as a coach have also carried on afterwards. And that one time I realized how many of my former competitors and students were on my Facebook friends list. So you get a chance to build one-on-one relationships. And then finally, we think you're going to enjoy being a speech coach because you're going to help students build grit, and grit is good. Angela Duckworth, in her book entitled Grit, defines it as a combination of passion and perseverance for a singularly important goal. And sort of the point of her book was that grit is equally indicative, if not more, than talent as to someone's ability to succeed. She thinks that grit is what happens when someone fails but is not deterred. Grit is about persistence. And, you know, the older I get, the more that resonates with me because, you know, if we're all honest, rarely are we always winning. Sometimes I just wish that I could break even on a day of teaching. But so there is a lot of failure in our lives, but we have to learn from it. And speech competition offers students a chance to develop grit as they practice with consistent interest and effort. All of your students are going to develop grit because, if we're honest, winning anything is hard. Two stories, I'll try to make them brief. The first goes under the title, "You Can Work as Hard as You Possibly Can and Still Be Average." And now I'm going to tell you little Ed Smith's rowing story. 5 or 6 years ago, I was on a rowing jag. I have an indoor rower, and I'd been working for about a year. I was feeling pretty good about myself, and so I thought, well, I'll do a 2,000-meter time trial. That's the standard thing you measure your rowing prowess by. And you can get online and look and see what other rowers your age do. And so I did it, and I've never worked harder physically in my life. I thought about halfway through my heart was going to explode, and I still had about 3.5 more minutes to go. Truly, I'm not exaggerating when I say I've physically never been more taxed or exhausted. And afterwards, I got online and I looked at what my time was, and with people my age, I was right in the middle. I was average. I couldn't have tried any harder, and I'd been working for a year, and I was still right in the middle. But that didn't take away from all the other good things that had happened. Was I a great rower? No, I was average, but I felt pretty good about what I had accomplished. Or another story, not really a story, but an observation. 2 of my sons were cross-country runners, and I took it upon myself to try to learn a little bit more about running and technique. And one time, an older coach told me, you know, only one person ever wins the race, which is not a surprise. But he said, you can be a really, really good runner and still actually never win a race. And that really stuck with me. In other words, you could be an excellent runner and of a race of 230 people, you might come in 6th. Well, that's a really good outcome, but you didn't win. So does that make you a loser?
Technically, yes. Not like loser, but not the winner.
True, but that fact shouldn't diminish what you take away from the experience of running, of pushing yourself to find the limits of yourself. You could also be a mediocre runner coming in right in the middle and still benefit hugely from the experience. You shave time, you set goals, you run your personal best. You could also come in dead last in the race and still enjoy running because it feels good to move your body. And those observations also transfer over to speech.
Whether they win or not. Tell your students that if nothing else, They got up out of bed on the Saturday when nobody else wanted to, and they went to a tournament and they spoke their hearts out. Tell them to take pride in the knowledge that they are not among those cold and timid souls who know neither victory or defeat. Props to Teddy Roosevelt. Check out his Man in the Arena speech if you've never read it.
And we still think it makes a darn good declamation.
Yes.
You're going to have to help students deal with defeat, but if it's any consolation, as we all know, it builds a lot of character. Again, this is not the youth soccer from the 90s where everyone takes home a trophy just for lacing up their cleats.
Those first attempts are going to be rough but memorable. Here's one of my favorite extemp speeches in its entirety, given by a novice teammate of mine who drew a topic about which he knew nothing. Have you ever been to one of those college luncheons? I mean, who foots the bill for these things? If the college doesn't want to pay for it, they should make it potluck. Thanks.
In the same vein, our oldest son finaled extemp at his first tournament in middle school. Now, full disclosure, there were maybe 7 kids entered, okay, and it was middle school. Little Ethan Smith draws the following question: what should Russia do about Chechnya? His speech consisted of reading a quotation and then stating that Chechnya wasn't much bigger than New Jersey, so Russia should just give it back.
I'll never forget my youngest son, Ross, giving a simply wonderful practice impromptu speech in my kitchen using as one of his examples, Jackie Robinson, the first Black woman baseball player.
These are just some of the things, the 4 things we mentioned that you'll enjoy about being a speech coach. Betsy and I would love to help you any way that we can, as I said before we started. But in all seriousness, we need you, and the activity needs you. I don't regret for a single second any of the time I spent coaching. Like anything worth doing, there's a chance of succeeding, there's a chance of failure, and you'll experience both of those things along with your students. There'll be some disappointment, but there will be so much more that's so wonderful for you, and more importantly, for your students. Just remember, you're both doing important work.
We as speech coaches like to teach our students to bookend, so I'll do that. If you remember, I began the speech by asking you if you could pinpoint a pivotal moment in your life. Maybe you'll look back on the decision to become a speech coach one day and realize that it was a pivotal moment, not necessarily for you, but for the students whose lives took an unexpected turn for the better because of it. My coach, Bruce Florence, cast a long shadow over Kentucky forensics, as several of her students went on to have long coaching careers. So really, it was not my decision to take a speech class that was the pivotal moment. It was her decision to become a coach in the first place.
And we would love it if you all wanted to ask us any questions.
No. There they are.
And yeah, Bill, Eddie.
I love doing interp events, because it was so similar to acting and I was a thespian,
Yeah.
And so my question is, as a coach, where did you find the resources for fresh interps as opposed to perhaps the things that just kind of get done every year,
Yeah. Boy, that's the question, right? When I was coaching at Moorhead and University of Texas at Austin and Chapel Hill, I looked at a lot of the, because, those were all places that had nice libraries, and bookstores too. But I tended to look at the collections, yearly collections as a starting point. And then I would also say, okay, well, if there's a short story in the Best American Short Stories from, Granta, then I would go and look at all the issues of Granta, and so, to try to say like, oh, okay, like the Pushcart Prize. Has collections of short stories. Then they used to anyway, do a best of. And so I would look at those, but then I would say, okay, well, can I access where they're pulling those from and look there. Like that was something. And I remember one time I took the entire Morehead State team to UK, and we spent a whole day there, everyone reading literary journals and magazines to try to come up with, okay, that looks good. That's an interesting topic. And actually, the kid that I coached that won informative and nationals pulled his topic from that, from that huge session. If you don't have access to a major research university, I still think you can do many of the same things. You sort of identify where is new work being printed, and then look in those sources. I'm a little out of date and so probably Steve and Katie and some other folks could speak more to this. But you figure out that the best fiction's coming out in the New Yorker. So you start looking at those. You look at what plays are premiering off Broadway or on Broadway, and then you just begin to develop a sort of a list of places to look. That's probably the most, from my experience anyway, was the most time-consuming thing. I will also, because I try to be very pragmatic about these things, the freshest literature, I don't say how to say this, may not be necessary for every student. A student that's just starting and just getting their wings under them might very well profit by doing an old Stephen King short story, Spring Heel Jack, which is creepy and eerie and weird. For that student that has aspirations that you want to really be able to, send out to against the best of the state, the nation. That's where that churn of looking, happens. Making friends with readers. There are people that just read a lot. Librarians are great resources, but really just people who read a lot. I was really good for a while there. I really had my finger on prose for about 4 or 5 years when I was really in the thick of college coaching. I knew it. I never was that cognizant of poetry. I just didn't do it. But Amy Darnell, one of my former students, sure was. And so, I would say, hey, Amy, who are the poets I need to be reading? And so, it's a long process, but that's sort of my experience of it. It's the thing that takes the most time. If you love to read, it's great. It's, you're always looking for that next thing. And then does it suit the student? There are things that we found that I thought, oh, that's really good. It's just not a really good match for him or her, but that was my experience. Betsy reads a lot. And so she was always my sounding board, to say, what do you think about this? Thank you though. That's a great question. And it really is and other coaches, folks that have been at it more recently in high school than I have can chime in here if you want to.
I do want to say that they'll tend, if you want to let them go, they'll tend to want to do the most dramatic, heart-wrenching, make you cry stuff. But I think in the end, starting with really good literature is going to already automatically give them that leg up if they start with something solid. So try not to let them twist your arm about, oh, I want to do My Pony Got Cancer or anything like that.
Michael, we've all seen My Pony Got Cancer, okay? Listen, and as a cancer survivor, I can talk about that story, all right? So my pony got cancer. I cried and I was sad. I do think that that's a whole other conversation. I'm glad Betsy brought that up, but I do think that there is I always try to put the best literature that we could find that was fresh, that was challenging for the students. That's what I wanted to have in every competitor's hand if I could. It just takes a long time to find too. middle school, if you're a middle school coach, and Steve, are folks middle school coaches here? Is it all high? Okay, yeah. Yeah, there's a much less of a burden, okay, on that. Listen, I think the Rudyard Kipling Just So stories are going to work forever as storytelling for middle school. You know, How the Elephant Got His Trunk still makes me laugh. And, you know, there were people doing that on the Jessamine County High School speech team in 1981. All right. You know, Terry probably pulled those scripts out, you know, when she was there. So, you know, so that middle school, I think that burden is not quite there. You know, these are students that we just want to love the events and, you know, become comfortable with who they are as performers and, you know, what the demands are. So other questions?
I have a question, if I may.
Sure.
Could you talk about your advice in terms of, sorry, words are not coming to me really well right now. You mentioned short stories. Could you talk about using, you know, short stories to develop a DI piece or an HI piece as opposed to using published plays? Do you have a recommendation or advice one way or the other in terms of the genre?
I'm going to take that buck and I'm going to pass it to another. Now, and again, correct me, Steve, and everybody else, folks, correct me if I'm wrong, but they can pull, it used to be you couldn't pull DI and HI from back in the day. It had to be from published plays. Now that is not the case. And so so there's a wide range of possibilities. I would assume that with DI, and I haven't seen a national final lately, but that if you're pulling from a story, it's not going to have the narrative voice in. It's really going to be a solo. Okay. So I think there are probably lots of first person short stories that are more dramatic in the sense of that narrator is speaking to one particular kind of audience, and you could certainly use those. And I think that's fine. You know, I mean, whatever works. In HI, to be much more of a sense of it has to be multiple characters. And so folks tend to gravitate toward published plays in that instance, although they wouldn't have to. One of the things that I'm not crazy about is that I rarely see HIs that just have a few characters. Now it seems to be the more, you know, if you can have 8, that's great. If you can have 18, that's even better. But, you know, there's a devastatingly funny piece called Talking Chimp Gives First Press Conference that was published in the New Yorker. You know, you can look it up. Okay, there you go. Enjoy. There's my free gift to everybody. It's online, and it's one of the funniest things I've ever read. All of our sons, 2 of our sons did it in middle school because there wasn't that burden of, oh, you've got to have 15 characters. It's terribly funny. I doubt that it would ever succeed at a big level in the high school event because it's just the talking chimpanzee, you know, doing a press conference. So I think that, I mean, Jason, I get to make a short story long. Sorry, it's my tendency. I would think that there are, you're kind of wide open. All right. I mean, I think there's a lot of leeway. You know, this summer I spent 2 days reading through the descriptions of every play-on-play scripts. Looking for, not because I was looking for pieces, but because I was looking for a show to direct. And so, you know, you just have a lot of coffee and you know, and you get through and you just make these lists of, okay, that looks interesting. And then you read some more and then you find out about it and then say, okay, who do I have that works? Oddly, it's the first time I started teaching at Georgetown in 1996. And it's the first time in my entire career that I've ever picked a play to direct that I found through speech. And we're directing a play called Tammy the coming of age story of a girl who's part T-Rex. And I found out that initially through Speak, when I was doing research for a presentation on HI and DI, trends in HI and DI. Steve, I don't know how many years ago that was. But you know, you got some leeway, Jason. I kind of wish DI they would go back to multiple characters, but folks, you can, but I don't think folks are really doing that very much, are they? I mean, no, I mean, but listen, you can do lots worse than doing a good Lanford Wilson scene, between two characters. And so there's a difference between what is technically available to you. And then if you have great concerns about your students being competitive, there are other things you have to think about too. And so that being said, if you've got somebody who's tremendous, give them something and see what happens. Steve, you want to chime in on that?
I do want to chime in on that, and just a coaching idea. One thing I started doing in my last couple of years of coaching was we've all been in that situation, especially at the high school level, where we want to find a good duo for two women, and there are just not that many scenes written for two women out there. It's hard. And
not
of course,
for sure.
Yeah, and the hard part about, or if there are very often things that are hard to adapt for high school. And of course, the irony is that's very often, that's the most common pairing that you have that wants to do duo on your team, is two women. And so I started adapting children's stories into good duo scenes. One of my favorite things I ever coached was the little story Tiki Tiki Timbo. And I had a student who was from Vietnam or from Cambodia who had come in as a freshman, barely knowing anything in English. I had her in drama class, and it was a lot of pantomime on both of our parts to try and get things across. But her senior year, she was a very expressive performer. And her senior year, I wanted to do something that would really show her off. And she still had a very, very thick accent. And so we just decided to just play into that and find something that had an Asian setting. And we found this story, Tiki Tiki Timbo, which is this delightful little children's story with all kinds of repetition in it and goofy things you can do over and over and over. And it was basically like two HI speakers performing all these parts. And we had this one was a guy and a girl, but we made a great duo out of this scene, and it was just so much fun. And so I think you can find a lot of things with children's stories too that give you some freedom. That interview with the chimp, the press thing with the chimp that he was talking about, could be a great prose. It might not be as competitive in humorous and terp because it just has the one character, but when you sit through, when you're judging a round of prose and 5 of them all die in the first 5 minutes, and then one of them is funny, it stands out competitively. So it can be a really good choice to make.
It seems like distinctions of genres have bled and blended. Sure. It used to be that you weren't going to be doing a prose for an HI or a DI, and now that's just not the case. And the way rules work for duo and terp, where people can play multiple characters, it really has opened things up in some ways. Although in other ways, speech is hopelessly conservative in other approaches. But this is our activity. This is how we do it. Other questions?
I'm going to have to cut you short there.
Oh,
we're already a bit over our schedule.
Gotcha. Okay, sorry.
So we're going to wrap it up, but I want to congratulate everyone, because I think you just witnessed the national champions in duo interpretation. That was fantastic. Let's give them a hand.
Oh, thank you all.
So thank you all. Thank you both so very much. And that was exactly what I was hoping the speech would be, and more. And now I know. I got this very strange text from them last night that said, "What did you used to call that thing? Mom in a bag? What is that?" And so I answered "Mom in a box," thinking, what in the world is this going to be? What is this going to be? So I'm so glad to see that. And I hope you guys took to heart the lessons that they've learned about coaching, because I wrote down a lot of great quotations. And I'm going to have to get the exact wording on that dump truck full of skills that Congress is. I think that's amazing. But yeah. So thank you so much.